Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into a really complex piece of history, the Indian peacekeeping force, the IPKF, in Sri Lanka back in the late 1980s.
That's right. It's a mission that started with a lot of hope, internationally backed, but things went downhill fast. It turned into this really difficult, costly conflict.
And we're looking at this mainly through the eyes of Lieutenant General Depinder Singh. His analysis is incredibly detailed, very firsthand.
Yeah, his account is crucial. He doesn't just talk military tactics. He really gets into the strategy, or lack thereof sometimes, the harsh realities on the ground, and, well, the unintended consequences. It's quite a stark picture.
Absolutely. It's this scenario, isn't it? You have this seemingly well-intentioned effort to stabilize Sri Lanka, but it just spirals into this long, drawn-out combat. So our goal here is to unpack that for you, the listener.
We want to pull out the key lessons. Singh identified lessons about intervention, about peace, about the sheer difficulty of these kinds of operations, and importantly, about mission creep.
Exactly. That's the core question, really, that Singh keeps coming back to. Why did this mission, which was supposed to be about keeping peace, become so controversial and so costly?
And Singh suggests pretty strongly that a big part of the answer lies in, well, a fundamental misreading of the situation, particularly the LTTE's goals, and also the political instability within Sri Lanka itself.
Okay, so let's set the scene a bit. We need to understand the context first, the road to intervention. We're talking about the mid-1980s. Sri Lanka's deep in this ethnic civil war.
Right. It's primarily between the Sinhalese majority government and the Tamil minority, who felt increasingly marginalized. And the main militant group representing many Tamils was the LTTE, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. Very effective, very ruthless.
And India gets involved. Why? What was India's motivation here?
Well, it was complex. There were genuine concerns about regional stability, instability spilling over. There was a huge refugee crisis with Tamils fleeing Sri Lanka into southern India, which caused problems there.
Ah, right, particularly in Tamil Nadu.
Exactly. That created political pressure within India, too, because of the large Tamil population there sympathizing with the Sri Lankan Tamils. So India felt compelled, really, to step in and try to mediate.
And this leads to the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord in July 1987. Sounds like a diplomatic breakthrough on paper.
It did, yeah. India essentially guaranteed security, and Sri Lanka promised more autonomy for the Tamil areas in the north and east, and agreed to halt its military operations there.
And the IPKF, where did they fit into this accord?
They were central to it, but with a very specific and, as it turned out, wildly optimistic mandate. They were supposed to sort of supervise the ceasefire, ensure security temporarily, and crucially, oversee the disarmament of all the militant groups.
All of them, including the LTTE.
Yes, that was the key point. Everyone had to disarm. But Singh points out, right from the start, the military was being asked to do a political job, enforce peace, without really being equipped or perhaps even fully briefed for the combat that, well, almost inevitably followed.
So the seeds of the problem were kind of sown right there in the accord itself.
You could say that. The expectations were completely out of sync with the reality they were about to face.
Which brings us neatly into that collision, expectation versus reality, and this dangerous idea of mission creep. Singh talks about the initial arrival, right? Parades, optimism.
Yeah, there was this brief moment, maybe a few days, of public hope, welcome ceremonies in places like Jaffna. People thought, okay, maybe this will be quick, maybe this will stabilize things without more fighting.
But that didn't last long at all.
Not even days, really. Singh describes immediate friction. The Tamil groups, especially the LTTE, were deeply suspicious. They didn't necessarily see India as a neutral peacekeeper.
Why not? Weren't they there partly to protect Tamil interests?
Well, yes, but the LTTE saw India pursuing its own geopolitical interests. They worried India might favor rival Tamil groups, or that the autonomy promised wouldn't be genuine independence, which is what the LTTE ultimately wanted. They saw the IPKF as potentially enforcing a deal they didn't fully agree with.
Okay, so suspicion from the word go. And Singh highlights these massive operational gaps too.
Oh, huge gaps. He talks about the disconnect between the orders coming from Delhi, which were often quite political, and the situation the commanders were facing on the ground in Sri Lanka. Logistical problems were immediate.
Like what sort of logistical issues?
Lack of proper maps, for a start. Not enough understanding of the local terrain or supply routes, especially in the north. Language barriers. Too many Indian soldiers spoke Tamil, but the Jaffna dialect was different enough to cause communication issues, breed mistrust.
And intelligence.
That was probably the biggest failure early on. Singh says they had very poor human intelligence on the LTTE. They didn't really know their command structure, where their weapons caches were hidden, how prepared they were for a fight. They kind of treated them like a conventional force they could just round up.
Instead of the experienced guerrilla force they actually were.
Exactly. A sophisticated, deeply embedded insurgency. They completely underestimated them initially.
So the stage was set for things to unravel. And the critical turning point was the LTTE refusing to disarm.
That was it. The deadline in the accord for laying down arms came and went. Prabhakaran, the LTTE leader, just flat out refused. He accused both India and the Sri Lankan government of betraying the Tamil cause.
And what did that refusal mean for the IPKF's mission?
It meant the entire basis of the mission, the peaceful disarmament part, just collapsed overnight. India's diplomatic gamble had failed. The ceasefires broke down instantly. Small skirmishes that had been happening suddenly escalated.
So the IPKF's role had to change drastically.
Instantly, they went from supposedly monitoring a peace process and collecting weapons voluntarily to having to actively disarm a very determined, very well-armed group that now saw them as the enemy. That wasn't peacekeeping anymore.
That sounds like the definition of mission creep, but happening almost vertically, not gradually.
Precisely. Singh details this sudden, massive expansion of their tasks. It wasn't just about disarmament anymore. Suddenly, the Indian Army was responsible for area control, setting up checkpoints, imposing curfews.
They were essentially governing parts of the country.
To an extent, yes. Civil administration fell to them in many areas because the local structures had collapsed or were ineffective. They were doing law enforcement, dealing with crime, mediating local disputes. It went way beyond any standard military plan.
And they weren't really trained or prepared for this kind of counterinsurgency role, especially the civil administration part.
Not adequately, no. Especially not for the specific challenges of fighting the LTTE in that environment. Singh argues they were trying to apply conventional tactics to an unconventional war, at least initially. And this shift, this taking on of policing and governing roles, it fundamentally changed how they were perceived locally.
From peacekeepers to occupiers.
In the eyes of many Tamils, yes. Especially once the heavy fighting started. It became very difficult to maintain that initial image of a helpful temporary force.
Which leads us into the grim reality of that combat. Section 2, let's talk about the battle for Jaffna. Singh portrays this as a really central and brutal part of the operation.
It was. Jaffna was the LTTE's stronghold, their symbolic capital. Taking it was seen as essential to breaking their power after they refused to disarm. But it turned into this incredibly difficult urban warfare scenario.
What made it so difficult tactically? You mentioned Jaffna's layout earlier.
Right, it's a city of narrow, winding streets, densely packed houses, walls, compounds. The LTTE knew this terrain intimately. They'd prepared for years, building bunkers, trenches, even connecting tunnels between houses. It was a fortress.
So the IPKF's tanks and armored vehicles weren't much use?
They were almost a liability in many places. Singh explains they just couldn't move freely in those tight lanes. And worse, their main guns often couldn't angle down far enough to hit LTTE fighters firing from ground floor windows or basement openings.
So it became an infantry fight.
Almost entirely. Slow, grinding, house to house, street by street clearing operations. Incredibly dangerous for the soldiers, very high casualties.
And this brings up that terrible civilian dilemma you mentioned, fighting an enemy hidden among the population.
It's the classic, awful problem of urban counterinsurgency. Singh really emphasizes the difficulty and the trauma for the troops. They're trying to root out LTTE fighters who are often wearing civilian clothes, using homes as firing positions, maybe even using civilians as shields.
How could they even tell who was who?
Often they couldn't. Mistakes were inevitably made, civilian casualties happened, and every incident, real or perceived, was immediately exploited by the LTTE for propaganda. It just destroyed any remaining goodwill the IPKF might have had among the Jaffna population.
So the cost of taking Jaffna wasn't just in soldiers' lives.
No, the cost in terms of local support and international perception was immense. It really marked a point of no return in many ways, solidifying the view of the IPKF as an occupying force, certainly among many Tamils, high casualties on both sides, and a massive shift in public opinion.
Okay, so Jaffna is eventually taken, but the LTTE, being guerrillas, they don't just surrender, they adapt.
Exactly. They melted away. They lost the conventional hold on the city, but they retreated into the countryside, particularly the dense jungles of the Vanadi region in the north.
So the fight shifts from urban warfare to jungle warfare.
Right. And the LTTE were masters of this. Classic guerrilla tactics. Hit-and-run attacks, ambushes, booby traps, using the terrain for cover, staying highly mobile and elusive.
How did the IPKF have to adapt their tactics for this new phase?
It required a big shift. Less reliance on large formations and heavy equipment, more focus on small, specialized counterinsurgency patrols. Singh mentions the use of highly trained units, like their Gata platoons, for deep jungle operations.
And these are like commando units.
Essentially, yes. Trained for operating independently for longer periods, tracking, reconnaissance. They also had to become hyper aware of IEDs, improvised explosive devices. The LTTE used them constantly on paths, roads, near water sources.
That sounds incredibly stressful.
Absolutely. Constant tension. They also increased reliance on helicopters, not just for attack support, but crucially for surveillance, trying to spot LTTE movements from the air and for casualty evacuation. Getting wounded soldiers out of dense jungle quickly was vital.
And all this fighting in remote jungle areas must have put a huge strain on logistics.
A massive strain. Singh describes this as a constant battle in itself, just keeping the forward operating bases supplied with essentials, food, water, ammunition, medical supplies was a major undertaking.
How did they manage it?
Convoys, airdrops were possible, but every supply run was vulnerable to ambush. Maintaining those supply lines through hostile territory took a huge amount of manpower and resources, and it definitely affected morale. Dealing with heat, humidity, disease, on top of the combat stress, it was grueling.
You mentioned helicopters. This sounds like it really highlighted the need for different branches of the military to work together.
Definitely. Singh stresses the lessons learned in inter-service coordination. The Army couldn't do it alone. The Indian Navy was critical for trying to blockade the coast, stop the LTTE smuggling weapons and supplies from India across the Palk Strait.
Which was notoriously difficult to patrol effectively.
Very difficult.
Yep.
And the Air Force, as we said, was vital for transport, reconnaissance, air support, and medevac. The IPKF experience really forced India's military to improve how its Army, Navy, and Air Force operated together in a complex, joint environment. They learned some hard lessons in real time.
Okay, so we've got the fighting, the tactical adaptations, the logistical strain, but then there's this whole other layer, the political maze and the humanitarian side. Section 3. The IPKF had this dual role, right?
Yes, and this is really important to understand. They weren't just fighting the LTTE. They were also mandated under the Accord and subsequent agreements to carry out significant civilian support and humanitarian tasks. The whole hearts and minds aspect.
What kind of things were they actually doing on that front while combat was ongoing?
A lot, actually. They were rebuilding infrastructure, damaging the fighting roads, bridges, power lines, communication networks. They set up medical camps providing free health care to thousands of civilians who had no other options.
Food distribution, too.
Yes, distributing essential food supplies, managing refugee camps, helping people displaced by the conflict return to their villages where possible. They even got involved in trying to organize local elections to restore some semblance of normal governance.
It sounds vital, providing those services, but Singh calls it a double-edged sword. Why? What was the downside?
The fundamental conflict of roles. One day, an IPKF patrol might be involved in a firefight where civilians could get hurt, or conducting intrusive cordon and search operations looking for militants. The next day, different soldiers from the same army are handing out food or medical aid in the same village.
So it created confusion, distrust.
Exactly. How do civilians reconcile those two images? The IPKF was simultaneously the combatant fighting the LTTE, the police force arresting people, the aid provider, and even the political mediator trying to manage disputes between rival Tamil groups, because the LTTE wasn't the only group.
Ah, right. There were others like EPRLF, PLA.
Yes, and they often fought amongst themselves too, and the IPKF got caught in the middle trying to keep them apart or support the groups that were cooperating with the Accord. It tangled them up in local politics in a way that made it almost impossible to be seen as truly impartial or solely benevolent. People doubted their motives.
Okay, so a really complex situation on the ground. And meanwhile, the political support for the whole mission started to weaken.
Dramatically. Back in both Colombo and Delhi, the political foundation started to crumble. The casualties were mounting, the financial cost was huge, and the mission seemed to have no clear end in sight.
And there was a key shift in Sri Lanka itself, wasn't there, with President Premadasa?
Yes, this was pivotal. The original accord was signed by President Jaywardene, but his successor, Rana Singh Premadasa, came to power largely on a nationalist platform, promising to get the Indian troops out.
So the Sri Lankan government, which had initially invited the IPKF, now wanted them gone.
Wanted them gone, and according to Singh's analysis, took active steps to make that happen. This is where it gets really complicated and, frankly, treacherous for the IPKF.
What did Premadas's government do?
Singh provides compelling evidence, supported by other sources later, that Premadas's government began covertly supporting the LTTE
Wait, supporting the very group the IPKF was fighting. How?
by providing them with weapons, money, intelligence. The thinking apparently was to use the LTTE to lead the Indian forces, increase Indian casualties and political pressure back in Delhi, hastening their withdrawal. It was a cynical double game.
That's staggering. So the IPKF is fighting an enemy that's secretly being armed by the host government.
Precisely. It created an absolutely untenable situation for the Indian commanders and soldiers on the ground. They were caught between an enemy they couldn't fully defeat and a supposed ally who was actively undermining them.
Singh's phrase about this really sticks, doesn't it? No friend in the field, no friend in government.
It perfectly captures the feeling of isolation. The military strategy was completely disconnected from the shifting political reality. Their political cover was gone. They were operating in a vacuum of trust.
What's the big strategic lesson there, according to Singh?
That military power, however strong, has its limits if it's not constantly synchronized with clear, stable political goals and reliable diplomatic partnerships. When alliances shift like that, the military mission becomes almost impossible. You can't fight a war when your supposed partner is helping your enemy.
An impossible situation, which inevitably leads to the withdrawal. Section 4, the drawdown and legacy.
Yes, the withdrawal became a political necessity. Premadasa formally demanded it, and there was also a change of government in India. VP Singh replaced Rajiv Gandhi, and the new government was less invested in the Sri Lankan venture and more focused on ending the costly deployment.
Was the withdrawal itself dangerous, getting tens of thousands of troops out under those conditions?
Extremely dangerous. Singh describes it as a logistical nightmare carried out under constant threat. They had to pull back troops and heavy equipment from forward areas, often through territory controlled or contested by the LTTE or other groups.
So they were potentially facing attacks even as they were leaving.
Yes, they had to negotiate safe passage in some cases, essentially coordinate with the very people they'd been fighting. Every road move, every ship loading, every helicopter flight was tense. It was a phased withdrawal, carefully managed but fraught with risk until the last soldier left.
And the feeling among the troops. Singh reflects on this, the emotional cost.
Deep disillusionment. They had fought hard, lost thousands of comrades killed or wounded. They'd faced incredibly difficult conditions to political betrayal, and they were leaving without having achieved the mission's original goal: lasting peace and the disarmament of the LTTE.
So a sense of unfinished business, sacrifice without clear victory.
Very much so. A feeling that their efforts and losses hadn't led to the intended outcome, that the political goals hadn't been met. It left a lasting scar on the psyche of the Indian Army, according to Singh.
So how does Singh ultimately assess the intervention? Was it necessary? Was it a failure?
His conclusion is quite nuanced. He argues it probably was necessary at the time, in 1987, to prevent potentially worse outcomes, maybe greater chaos or even larger scale massacres, if the Sri Lankan army had continued its offensive unchecked in the north and east.
So it achieved something in the short term.
Perhaps stabilizing the situation temporarily, yes. But he's adamant that it stands as a major cautionary tale, a lesson in the huge unintended costs, military, political, human, that come with interventions when the mandate isn't crystal clear, when the political commitment wavers, and when you underestimate the complexities on the ground.
Okay, let's try to boil down those hard-earned lessons Singh identifies. What are the key takeaways for you, the listener?
Lesson 1, absolutely critical: mandate clarity. Before sending troops anywhere, the political objective, the military objective, and the exit strategy must be absolutely clear, realistic, and agreed upon by everyone involved.
The IPKF mandate was too vague, too optimistic.
And full of contradictions, yes. Enforce peace, but also disarm militants who don't want to disarm. That inherently requires planning for combat, not just monitoring. Success wasn't clearly defined.
Lesson 2, the danger of open-ended commitments. Mission creep happens when there's no clear endpoint.
Exactly. The Accord didn't really specify how secure things needed to be before the IPKF left. That allowed the mission to drift and become vulnerable to political changes back home and in the host country. You need clear benchmarks for withdrawal.
Lesson 3, synchronization. Military action needs political and diplomatic backing.
Total synchronization. Singh hammers this home. The military can achieve tactical victories, like taking Jaffna, but if the political strategy collapses or gets betrayed, those victories mean little in the long run. You need a whole-of-government approach where everyone is pulling in the same direction. The IPKF became isolated.
And the final lesson Singh draws: preparation for modern conflict.
Yes, the IPKF experience was a wake up call for the Indian military about the realities of modern counterinsurgency and complex peacekeeping. It showed the need to integrate civil affairs, media management, psychological operations, and sophisticated intelligence gathering right from the start, not learn it the hard way.
So the legacy of the IPKF is quite significant then, even if painful.
Profound, really. It led to major changes in Indian military training and doctrine,
Hmm.
particularly regarding counterinsurgency and joint operations between the Army, Navy, and Air Force. It also created for a long time a deep skepticism in India, politically and publicly, about getting involved in conflicts outside its borders.
A sense of never again unless absolutely necessary and meticulously planned.
Something like that. A much greater appreciation for the immense costs and complexities involved, and the need to respect the sacrifices made by the soldiers caught in such difficult circumstances. Singh insists we remember their professionalism under fire, even as we analyze the strategic failures.
So, wrapping up, Singh's view seems clear. The IPKF in Sri Lanka was, as he put it, a costly classroom.
A very costly classroom, yes, teaching hard lessons in diplomacy, strategy, logistics, politics, and ultimately human sacrifice.
And the key knowledge nugget for you, our listener, to take away from all this:
It's that even interventions launched with, arguably, good intentions require incredibly careful planning, solid intelligence, adaptable strategies, and crucially, unwavering and unified political will. Because, as the IPKF found out,
the battle on the ground can sometimes be the easier part.
often, yes, compared to navigating the political minefields, the logistical hurdles, and the shifting allegiances that can ultimately make or break the entire mission. That's the enduring challenge of trying to enforce peace.
Which leaves us with a final thought, something for you to ponder based on Singh's account. Given what happened with the IPKF, specifically that political undermining, the host government covertly aiding the enemy,
President Primadasa's actions, yeah.
how should modern peacekeeping operations, maybe UN missions for example, structure their mandates or agreements to try and prevent that? How do you safeguard a mission against sabotage from the very government that initially invited you in?
Is it even possible? Or is that political risk, that potential for betrayal, just an inherent danger whenever external forces intervene in complex internal conflicts? It's a fundamental question for any future peacekeeping effort.
Something to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into a really challenging and important moment in recent history.